Chapter 23, Animal Tissues and Organ Systems. Different cells build different parts of animal bodies. Now, all of our tissues are made up of cells, but cells can do different things. Groups of cells that do the same thing are organized into a level called tissues. All right? Different tissues interact and function as units called organs. Now, when you put a group of cells together into these tissues and organs, you start to see what are called emergent properties. This is almost like a synergy. So a single cell can do a certain number of things, but when you put it together with a bunch of other cells like itself into something we might call an organ or a structure, it can do more things than the individual cells can do by themselves. For instance, epithelial cells can be joined together to make capillaries, and capillaries have a whole list of functions that the single cells that make up the capillaries don't have. Organs are arranged into organ systems. So, for instance, all of the organs involved in the digestive tract, all of the organs involved in the cardiovascular system, things like that. The study of all the structure of an animal body is called anatomy. Then when we look at how they work together, how do they function, that is called physiology. There's 4 basic tissue types. Okay, and all tissues, their cells are embedded in what is called an extracellular matrix, and that's a mixture of water, carbohydrates, lipids, and usually some protein fibers. Tissues fall into the 4 broad categories of epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissues. Epithelial tissues are tightly packed cells that coat the body's internal and external surfaces. Each tissue has a free exposed surface. The opposite side is anchored to a layer of matrix called a basement membrane. And so we have the free surfaces in our GI tract, our epithelial tissues, but our skin is also a type of epithelial tissue. Simple epithelial tissue means that there's a single layer of cells. Stratified means that there are multiple cell layers. Simple squamous epithelial tissue is a single layer of flattened cells that allows substances to pass by diffusion and osmosis, so it forms a barrier. You find it in the lining of blood vessels. The alveoli of lungs has simple squamous epithelial tissues. A single layer makes it a lot easier to allow things to diffuse back and forth. Simple cuboidal, primarily you find it in kidney tubules and some of the glands. Simple columnar is single layer of column-shaped cells that secrete and absorb substances. We find them in the lining of the digestive tract, the bronchi of the lungs, and in the uterine tubes. Now let's look at the shapes real quick. Simple squamous is very irregularly shaped. No 2 cells are exactly alike, and it's very, very thin. A cuboidal cell is almost a square. Okay, it's almost a cube, but it's got rounded corners, so it's not a perfect cube. And simple columnar is large rectangular cells. Okay. Now, when we look at multiple layers, we call that stratified epithelial tissues. Stratified squamous would be your outer layer of skin. You're constantly shedding skin cells as new cells are emerging from what is called the germ layer in your skin. And these shed cells, if you will, make up a significant portion of household dust, actually. and dry skin, because by the time the skin cells, the epithelial cells, make it to the surface, they're basically dead cells that are just full of keratin, which is a wax-like substance. Now, there is stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar, but you don't need to know that. It's very rare in the body, and so we're not going to even talk about that. But we are going to talk about connective tissue. These are different cells scattered within an extracellular matrix rather than being connected to one another. There is loose connective tissue, also known as areolar, and that is spelled areolar tissue. Try to move that up so you can see a little better. Then you have dense connective tissue. Okay, and the dense connective tissue is tightly packed strands of collagen. Adipose tissue, that's fats. Basically, these are fat cells. The part with the nucleus and stuff is called the adipocyte, which is spelled Adipocyte. And then it's got this big membrane slam full of lipid oils or fat. Bone is a tissue, cartilage is a tissue, and blood is a tissue. We'll talk about some of these as we go. Loose connective. Has protein fibers, elastin, collagen, holds organs in place, attaches epithelial tissues to other tissues. You find it under the skin, between the organs. It's just a tissue that helps pack things in and keep them stable. Dense connective tissue is cells in a very dense matrix of protein fibers. It connects muscle to bone and bone to bone. Those are tendons and ligaments. Tendons are muscle to bone to bone are ligaments. Adipose tissue is fat cells. We find it between the skin, between muscles, around the heart, and around joints. Blood consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets in a liquid matrix. It's called plasma. It transports gases, hormones, wastes, and nutrients, and it flows inside of blood vessels. You have all the veins and the arteries and the capillaries. The cartilage is a mix of cells. Primarily, there's a bunch of fine collagen fibers, and then they're used for support. Now, when you're first in the womb and you're still in the fetal stages, you have this model of your skeleton completely made out of cartilage, and it will eventually become ossified enough so that when you are born you have rudimentary bones, but they're still not fully developed. As you get older, they will become more developed, and then you have to go through growth, etc. Some of the cartilages, there's 3 types, but I don't expect you to learn 3 types. We're just going to call them all cartilage. You find some in your ears, that's elastic cartilage. In the joints, you have in the joints and bone ends, we have what is called hyaline cartilage. And then we also have the respiratory tract, and that has some hyaline cartilage in it as well that helps support some of the more major airways. Then we have bone, and there's basically a couple of different types of bone. There's compact bone, and then there's cancellous bone. We're just going to learn bone. It has a cell of, basically it's made up of collagen and minerals. It provides very firm support, and it anchors muscles and provides an origin for muscles. In order for a muscle to work, it has to have an origin bone. This is the bone it doesn't move, and then it has the bone it does move called the insertion bone. All right. Muscle tissues consist of cells that contract when electrically stimulated. This is done through a process of diffusion of sodium ions into the cell to send an action potential, and then to reset before the next muscle contraction. The sodium flows back out and resets. Muscle tissue attaches to soft tissue or bone. Striated muscle is the muscle that is voluntary. Okay? So anything you have to think about to move. I want to pick up something. I want to run. I want to walk. That's all striated or skeletal muscle. And then you also have cardiac muscle. It is striated, but we don't have to think about beating our heart, right? And then we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is just slow, involuntary contractions. I don't want to have to think about contracting the muscles in my stomach to mix up my lunch. I don't want to have to think about remembering to move food through my small intestines. Okay, that's just all done for me through my involuntary muscle or nervous system. And then the heart is striated, like I said, but it has an automatic pacemaker in it. It's called the AV node, and the AV node sends contractions out regularly. Now, the stronger your heart muscle, the fewer beats per minute you need. So if you've got, if you have a heart rate of 70 or between 60 and 70, you're going to be in excellent shape. All right. There's a lot of things that can affect your heart. Lack of activity, not enough exercise. You don't get up and walk enough. You spend too much time watching television or whatever, and that will weaken your heart muscle. And it will take more beats per minute to move the blood through the system to keep yourself alive. It's a good reason to exercise, things like that. Smoking can deteriorate and cause problems with your heart. Bad diet can occlude the arteries feeding the muscle cells in your heart. Nervous tissue. The primary cell of nervous tissue are axons, although there's some other types. Axons and nerve tissue uses electrical signals, but it's a chemoelectricity. It's the movement of sodium ions and potassium ions to send action potentials or nerve impulses. And it forms these webs. And there's still a whole lot about the nervous system we don't know. And we're going to, we're still learning about things. Where do we store memories? How do we store memories? There are voluntary actions, things you think about, and there are involuntary actions like reflexes, things you don't think about. Some of the organ systems, the nervous system handles all of the communication in the body. We also have endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system is just a collection of organs that secrete hormones. They might be related or they might not, but anything that secretes a hormone is in the endocrine system. And a lot of the stuff in the endocrine system is in other systems as well. Okay, hormones communicate things in the body as well. They are more of a long-term solution to problems, whereas the nervous system tries to handle the quick, short-term, we got to get it done quick type of problems. Skeletal system is just for support, and it helps in movement because it gives an origin and insertion for the muscles. The muscular system moves us and takes care of various functions in the body. We don't have to think about things like if you have high blood pressure, you have smooth muscle in your major veins and arteries that will relax. It will increase the size of the interior of your major veins and arteries, and by doing this, it will lower blood pressure. Okay. Your hormone system can also do that by secreting certain hormones. Muscular system can handle any voluntary movement. You want to shoot a basket, you want to run, whatever. got ahead of myself here. All right, there we go. The digestive system, the circulatory system, and the respiratory system. Digestive, that's how we take in nourishment. Circulatory, that's how we move blood, and the blood moves all the various things that it moves. Nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Respiratory system basically brings in oxygen and gets rid of CO2, carbon dioxide. The urinary system filters the blood and pulls out certain body fluids. It plays a role in maintaining your body pH, etc. Your integumentary system are all the organs connected to the outer skin. So your epithelial tissues, which are your epidermis, your dermis, your hair, all the glands that secrete things on the surface of your skin. Immune and lymphatic systems help fight infections and defend you against hostile agents. The reproductive system, this is how we make more people, and we seem to be really good at that as our population continues to expand dramatically. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically internal constancy. Every animal can tolerate a certain range of temperature, a certain range of blood oxygen, a certain range of pH in the body, etc. There's all these different parameters that have to be controlled and maintained to keep an animal healthy. And homeostasis is that. Okay? That's what it does. It's kind of like a thermometer. Okay? And that's how it works. You have a thermostat. And there's two systems. There's a positive and a negative feedback. Negative feedback, if you get too hot, that's the stimulus, your body will act to cool you down. If you get too cold, the stimulus, it will act to heat you up. The action always counters the original stimulus. That's negative feedback. Positive feedback is where the body reacts to a change by amplifying it. So, for instance, birth, when you undergo parturition, the entire 9 months that you are pregnant, if you're a female, you are building oxytocin receptors on the walls of the uterus. Oxytocin causes the muscles in the uterus to contract. So when it comes time to give birth or parturition, you start producing oxytocin. And every time the oxytocin binds to these receptors in the uterine muscles, they contract. And with each contraction, it stimulates the release of more oxytocin. And so then the stronger the contraction, the more oxytocin is released. So basically, it increases the original stimulus instead of moving it in the opposite direction. It also works for producing milk in the female mammals. Okay, prolactin is a hormone that's involved in that. But basically, when you first give birth, you're not giving much milk. You're mostly giving this stuff called colostrum, which is kind of a temporary immune system for the baby. And then as the baby suckles, that causes hormones to be released that increases the amount of milk made every day. And so the purpose of that is, as the child continues to suckle, it'll start drinking more milk as it gets bigger. Okay. Integumentary system regulates temperature and conserves moisture. It's also your first line of defense against any kind of pathogen. A pathogen is any organism that can cause you to get ill or sick. Okay? It has a role in nutrition, basically vitamin D synthesis. Sunlight on your skin will help you to develop vitamin D. Vitamin D is a mood booster. Okay? If you're feeling kind of sad or run down, go sit in the sun for a little while, and it will raise your spirits. This is commonly done in hospitals for people who are in long-term care. They like to just get rolled outside and get some fresh air and some direct sunlight, and it helps them get better quicker. Skin pigmentation. Let's talk about that a little bit. Here, I skipped a slide here. This is some of the different tissues in your integumentary system. Okay, and the top layer is your epithelial, and then right under there, this stuff here is called the dermis. A blister, interestingly enough, is when you take this layer of epidermis and separate it from the dermis, and then fluid is secreted in there to help against any kind of abrasion or friction. Okay. Skin pigmentation. What is skin pigmentation? Well, it's how much melanin we do or don't produce. Okay? Skin pigmentation, the primary purpose of melanin in your skin is to block ultraviolet light absorbance. All right? UV light alters DNA and can cause cancers. All right? Melanomas are a good example. So ultraviolet radiation mutates your cells. That's bad. So our body has got a defense mechanism. It produces melanin to help prevent us from getting cancer. So if you look at where the different people originally settled on this planet, those in areas closest to the equator tend to have more pigment than those who developed like in the far northern latitudes. Okay, a Viking that had fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes wouldn't do very well on the equator. He would absorb so much ultraviolet radiation that he would die much younger, simply because he couldn't protect himself from ultraviolet. Interestingly enough, tanning. People like to tan. Now, there is a new way of tanning now. It's called spray tanning, which is a lot healthier for you unless they find that the chemicals are carcinogens. But I'm not aware that they've done that yet. But if you go lay out in the sun to try to tan, and as you get browner, what that literally is your body telling you, hey, you're killing us. We're going to try to override your foolishness, and we're going to add more melanin. And this melanin is going to interfere with the ultraviolet radiation and hopefully keep you from getting a cancer. But there's a couple of downsides to overusing sitting out in the sun or sitting in these ultraviolet tanning beds. Now, there are some studies that show that tanning beds can be very detrimental to your health and can, in fact, cause certain melanomas if overused. But these studies are highly resisted by the tanning salon industry. If you really want to have, if you're pale and you want to get a better color for aesthetic reasons, use the spray tans. Okay? And it should make you look better. You won't look as pale. And it's a lot safer than tanning salons and laying out in the sun. Basically, the amount of pigment you produced is controlled by 6 genes in your genome, and the more genes that you have, if you have an on, that produces melanin, and then if you have an off, if you have none that produce melanin, you would be an albino. Okay, but there are 6 genes that affect the amount of melanin in things like your skin and your eyes and stuff like that. That wraps up Chapter 23.